for BC Government Relations for Tourmaline. Please come up, Curtis.
Hold the applause, hold the applause. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Curtis Kitchen. I'm with Tourmaline. If you're not familiar, Tourmaline is Canada's largest natural gas producer. Thank you. And today I have the pleasure of introducing Minister Dix. Adrian Dix was first elected as the MLA for Vancouver Kingsway in 2005. Adrian was appointed Minister of Energy and Climate Solutions and Minister responsible for Francophone Affairs in November 2024. He is a fierce defender of public health care and previously served as Minister of Health from July 2017 to November 2024. And during his time as Health Minister, he helped lead the province through the worst public health crisis in modern history, the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're really lucky in the energy sector. He's now focused his efforts towards our amazing issues and challenges. And I'm happy to say I was actually going to tell you this tomorrow, but since you're here now, your efforts have actually resulted in Tourmaline moving forward with our new 5-year plan, which includes growing our total production by 30%, and that entire growth is focused in British Columbia. So, thank you. So that's a pretty big deal. We heard earlier the fundamentals are there in terms of demand, and we are happy to satisfy that demand. There's significant, amazing resource in British Columbia, and these investments they'll double our royalties to ultimately $700 million per year just from Tourmaline, double the jobs, and the prosperity generally around British Columbia. So with that, I'd like to welcome Minister Dix. Thank you so much. We look forward to your speech here.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and great to be here on the territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people. Great to be here with you today to say something that I've been saying and working on through action since I became Minister of Energy and Climate Solutions. We need to get things done, and we need to get things done with urgency. I wanted to acknowledge I have two opposition critics here that I can see. David Williams is here, I think, and Larry Neufeld. And they really, Gavin Dew is there as well. Gavin Dew, nothing going on in the Conservative Party today. They're here to see me. You bet. You bet. I understand it. There's nothing going on. Look over there. Look over there. And it's great to be here. I think Eva Clayton was here, the president, right there. We did something really remarkable last week. The Nisga'a Nation, our treaty partners and the government, there was an announcement around the environmental assessment for the Cy Lissom's project, and it was a great moment. It was great to be there with President Clayton, with Andrew, and many others. It's good to see you there. I want to start and talk about a little bit about how I see the current circumstance. And I think Curtis summarized this in his introduction. There is enormous opportunity, and we need to seize it now, not just in one area, but in every area. And part of that starts in British Columbia with BC Hydro. And really a change which I think has come. We've had an outstanding period at BC Hydro in many respects. BC Hydro rates have been approximately 12% below the rate of inflation since 2017, which is good news for competitiveness overall in British Columbia. That is an unprecedented time, I think, that we may not see again for a while for some important reasons which I want to talk to you about. When BC Hydro was founded, when the BC government, WAC Bennett, nationalized BC Hydro, it was largely because of a reluctance on the part of the private sector in BC to take on risk. The risk of developing two rivers at once, the risk involved in a province-building economic strategy that was needed. And so contrary to some expectation at the time, and maybe retrospectively, the Bennett government nationalized BC Electric and proceeded with that plan. BC Hydro was an agent of economic growth and of province building. And to some degree over time, and it continues to do projects, but not to the same degree, Site C being an exception to that, I would say, BC Hydro has been an excellent operating company as a Crown corporation. And some of the examples include the reduction that I talked about in terms of electricity rates, but not in the same way an agent of economic development and province building. I believe, as minister responsible, and I think this is reflected in the actions of BC Hydro in recent months, that BC Hydro, to support a BC economy that needs economic growth, particularly in resource industries, but not exclusively in resource industries, needs to take on more risk. Move, again, to the company it was in the 1960s, driving economic development in our province, ensuring that the infrastructure that was needed for economic growth in our province is there. And you see this reflected, and talk about this, in the call for power. And the second call for power, which was came in 5 months after the original call for power, the need for more renewable electricity, in fact, twice as much in those two calls for power than Site C. And in that case, those calls for power, by the way, well, obviously backed up by integration to an extraordinary BC Hydro system, are private IPPs bidding on those projects with the requirement for First Nations participation. I think it's an extraordinary thing, and I'll come back to this in a few moments, and I'm going to keep an eye on the clock there. They said I couldn't do this in 15 minutes. That backed 51% ownership by First Nations on IPP projects, if you call them using a term we used to use, right? That will dramatically increase the supply of power in our province. And BC Hydro is engaging in a $36 billion 10-year capital plan because there was significant underinvestment for a couple of decades in BC Hydro's base electricity grid that needs to be resolved, and more things need to happen, like the 6th unit at Revelstoke bringing important capacity. And BC Hydro is building the North Coast transmission line. And that, I think, illustrates what BC Hydro needs to do. There is enormous opportunity in mining and critical minerals. And the fact that we are going to deliver electricity to the Northwest is politically important. People in the Northwest have less access to electricity produced in the Northeast than people in Vancouver do. So it's politically important, it's symbolically important, of course, but more important than that, it ensures there is opportunity. It's not sufficient. There needs to be more action taken in mining and more investment made by private sector companies. Opportunity to see enormous growth in our mining and critical mineral sector. And that could not happen if the status quo at BC Hydro around rates and around new entrants, such as mining companies, were maintained. So this fall, we'll be delivering legislation on that question, on the North Coast transmission line, to allow it for the first time to have a partnership with First Nations, to allow it to ensure that the companies we need to build the mining industry and the critical minerals industry that we need are there. And not just that, but the Port of Prince Rupert and LNG projects like Siliciums and others. This is not what BC Hydro has done over the last 15 years. This is building in advance of the needed power being assured. It's a risk. If we don't do it, those opportunities will not be available to us. So BC Hydro had to change. In my view, as well, on issues that have been the subject of some discussion here today, on issues of permitting and others, that the way that we regulate projects has to change. particularly with respect to renewables. In BC, since the late 1990s, we had a single window regulator for oil and gas. I know that because, spoiler alert, I'm old. I was there when it happened. And that single window regulator is now available, because we've made a change, the BC Energy Regulator, for renewable projects, such as transmission lines, such as wind projects, such as solar projects. A model that has worked in oil and gas over that time. Not perfect, but certainly worked, certainly better than multi-ministry regulation. That we would bring in such regulation for renewables and see change. It's hard. Not everyone agreed in the legislature. Not everyone agreed in the legislature. Well, but the fact is that we believe that a single window regulation and reducing red tape and regulation, our party believes that, is an important value, and we needed to do it, and we did. Further, when we announced the results of the first call for power, we exempted wind projects and the North Coast transmission line from the environmental assessment process. Because I believe that if you're talking about getting it done, and you understand what projects are, and you understand that you don't need a 3-year process of environmental assessment for a wind project. You need the electricity, you need it for mining, you need it for LNG, you need it for the 500,000 people who came to BC in my last 3 years as Minister of Health, net. You need it for all of those things. You got to get on with building it. And it shows that it's tough when the rubber hits the road, right? Because not everyone supported that as well, right? Not everyone in the legislature supported it, not everyone else supported it. But if you actually want to get it done, you have to take action. Not just about hiring 5 more people in a permitting ministry and expecting them to reduce it. You have to send a message that we are going to get these things done. We need the electricity, and we have to take steps to get it. And so we've taken that action. I want to say, because I want to leave some time to engage with you for questions, I want to talk about the industry beyond BC Hydro, industry beyond renewables, and then I want to say a word about First Nations. The industry beyond BC Hydro, and talk principally in BC about the natural gas industry, is facing a period of extraordinary opportunity. Extraordinary opportunity. When I became Minister of Health, when the John Horgan government was sworn in, there were no LNG projects in BC. 0. And now, there are more. There are 3 under construction, about $50 billion in CapEx, pretty good. There's 2 more that are significant. Xylisms is one that have gone through environmental assessment, facing final investment decision. That, and of course, LNG2, which is significant. And because of the action, I'd say of multiple governments in BC, and I note the action of Premier Horgan, we have now an industry where there was no industry before, and the lowest emission LNG in the world. A significant geographic advantage. We see the difficulties in the Panama Canal and Gulf Coast that wants to attract, Gulf Coast LNG that might want to attract Asia, having to go around South Africa to get there. This is an advantage for us that we have to take advantage of it. And that value of low emission LNG, that value of Canada, a stable place, that value of British Columbia, which supports and engages appropriately through reconciliation with Indigenous people, has real value in markets in Asia, I would argue. In markets, and the Premier was recently in Malaysia and Korea and Japan, and in all of those places, they recognize the advantage of what we're doing. We didn't have an industry, we have an industry, and it is going to be significant for our province, both in the building of LNG plants, and we're almost finished LNG 1, and they're exporting 10 shipments already, and as well as that, the possibility of a further $50, $60 billion in investment in our province at a time that we need it, at a time when we absolutely need that investment. So I think the opportunities there are significant, but there are also important issues in the upstream. And often we talk about LNG as if it is happening separated from the actual supply of natural gas. If it was separated from the supply of natural gas, we'd call it L. It's LNG. And we have to ensure, and this involves real work, the work that Tourmaline and others do every day with First Nations, to ensure that we do our work in terms of restoration, and we have met the government's commitment to Treaty 8 First Nations around restoration money, and we're working with them on this question. And certainly, natural gas companies do the same every day. Work we have to do. I recently met with all of the Treaty 8 First Nations together, the first time that had happened in a number of years by the provincial government, to address these very questions. Work we have to do something that's important to me. I think that changes in regulation can be of value, but what I find not useful in governance is too much tinkering. We got to come to some decisions, and we got to let people go. And that includes on questions of royalties and others, and we've been working very closely with the oil and gas industry and First Nations to address those questions. We are making progress in the upstream, and none of our success in LNG will matter as much if we don't resolve those questions. It will be a success, of course, for Alberta, and we're not unhappy with that, but it won't be a success for all of us, and we need to do that. Final thing I want to say is that we have to do this in British Columbia in a different way. One of the reasons why I think we have to be better on permitting, better on regulations, working clearly and more closely is that we are addressing reconciliation for historic reasons in BC, historic failures of our of our parents and their parents and parents and parents, to address First Nations issues. And I think this group of people, at least those of you who represent resource companies, are showing the way. CAP did a report today, amongst other things. It showed about 127 First Nations businesses with contracts worth $800 to $900 million to First Nations contractors from CAP participants from 2022 to 2024. Pretty impressive. It's learning. You look at the work that Tourmaline and others do every day to work with Indigenous people. You look at the North Coast Transmission Line, for the first time in history, a BC Hydro project that will be co-owned with First Nations. You look at the renewable IPPs, all of those renewable IPPs, if you take them together, 50% plus owned by First Nations. And on we could go. The work that Enbridge did on its pipeline and sharing the resource, the ownership, the commitment, that is meaningful and significant over time. We have to continue down this path. There is no easy road. You still require always social license. And that social license, if we are to succeed together, has to be a sharing of the upside as well as discussions of history. It has to be not one or either, but both together, and we need to do this. And finally, I just say we have to do it together. You know, this is an historic time. One of the great things about LNG, natural gas, our largest export to the United States in terms of value right now, but things are changing in our world. The United States and Canada signed an agreement at Ogdensburg to defend North America in 1940 against the possibility of Nazi invasion. It wasn't a love thing at the time. Winston Churchill didn't like it that much. He thought it was pessimistic, and he proved to be right. But it demonstrated the commitment we've had with the United States over a long time. Think of the Auto Pact and what it's meant for Ontario. Think of the Columbia River Treaty and what it's meant for BC, the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA, the more recent CUSMA trade agreement that came under President Trump. This has been, in particular, since 1987, a role where its supporters said it would drive economic growth. You know what? It did. Its opponents said it would make us too close to the United States. You know what? It did. Everybody was right. How about that? But we're dealing with the reality today. It's a new world reality. We've got to be able to rely on ourselves. And that means we got to be able to deliver projects on time in a way that's credible to international and Canadian investors and Indigenous communities alike. We have to come together in this time to diversify our markets, and we have the possibility to do that. And in this time, when On a single day or weekend, hundreds of people died in a heat dome, where we're facing forest fires, where we're facing floods, when we're facing the profound economic effects of climate change. We cannot ignore them. We cannot ignore those issues. We've got to engage. We've got to be the British Columbia that everyone should expect us to be. Dynamic, progressive, entrepreneurial, generous, addressing reconciliation head on and addressing climate change head on. I believe we can do these things together. And I am here as Minister of Energy and Climate Solutions to see that things get done. We have delivered action, action, action over the last period, and we are going to continue. And what's needed in our province is less bickering in our country, is less bickering and more unity. If you don't think I have criticisms of the federal government, I've never voted federal Liberal in my life. It's shocking, yeah. But, there's some people who are profoundly shocked here. I do, but now's the time to work with the federal government. If you think there are historic questions between the oil and gas industry and the forest industry and the NDP, there have been. But we need to work together right now. This is a moment where we cannot risk division. We can risk, and we need to encourage risk to build jobs in our economy, but we cannot risk division in these times. We've got to work together in these times, and I'm here to say I'm committed, and the Premier is committed to doing just that. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Minister. We're quite tight on time.
Holy mackerel,
yeah.
did I go over?
Not really. That was great. I really appreciated the breadth and the depth of that. I think it's giving us a lot to think about how you've put it together. So thank you for doing that. Maybe a little appreciation for the minister covering these issues. Okay. There's just so many ways this could take us. Here's a question for you, Minister. Has the last large dam been built in British Columbia?
No.
No. So where is the next one?
Look, no. So we'll go into this part of it. I sometimes get accused of putting too much detail in things. So I try not to be too detailed. I hope that's okay.
Undetailed.
My critics here have to put up with that from time to time. Go on and on and on and on. We did, as you know, there was a new call for power in May. And we did a request for expressions of interest on firm power and capacity. And there was a deadline that's just passed. We had more than 100 presentations, an unbelievable amount of potential firm base energy. That included pump storage dams in particular, that included natural gas projects, carbon capture, sequestration. Those both involved a deliberate decision by the government, myself and the cabinet, to ensure that that process was open to projects, even projects that had been sort of disallowed under the Clean Energy Act in the past by Premier Campbell, who had his reasons for doing it. But I think we need to look at all the options. And geothermal projects, and offshore wind projects, which are more intermittent, and others. So we have had a massive response to that, which we're going through. And so I think it's incorrect to assume that there won't be any dam projects when clearly people are presenting some of those projects to the government. And we should take a look at that. So I'm not saying what it will be, but I'm saying I would not exclude that. Equally, I think we have to be look at all of the opportunities that are presented to us. And not just to us, but to Fortis. And so you saw some of the regulatory changes we've made, which will also have benefits for Fortis as well in their area of concern. I think that we have to look widely. And that's why we included in that request for expression of interest, of course, hydro projects that might have been explicitly excluded by Premier Campbell. I'll think of one that's been put forward, and it's not a certain thing by any means, but it's been put forward by the Homolko First Nation that you'll know of, and a number of others that would be possible, but also looking at what all the opportunities are, including in no-emission natural gas.
I'm hearing a new language of collaboration in getting things done, and I think everyone here appreciates that. There has been the sense that there's a switch to be flipped, renewables versus gas or gas versus renewables. Do you think that we have turned the corner into being truly more collaborative in the regulatory realm as well on that?
I think you're seeing it, and people in the industry can comment and they'll judge, but I think the BC Energy Regulator is doing a particularly good job under some constraints, right, which are legal constraints. Right? There are some constraints that are imposed by the courts in addressing especially the needs around disturbances and other issues for the natural gas industry, for example. I think they're doing a very good job. They're an excellent regulator. It's why we expanded their reach. I think that form of regulation, one window regulation, paid for by those who are subject to the regulation, is a good model in terms of controlling costs and increasing efficiency. It's why all governments have supported that in oil and gas over time, and that's why we've expanded that to other areas. So I think this is a moment, and I would say on natural gas and on LNG, this is an extraordinary moment. The shipments have gone out. Cedar is under construction. I saw it recently, owned by the Haisla Nation. You see the work of the Nisga'a Nation. You see the work, and I want to acknowledge it, of Woodfibre LNG and all the work that they've done on their project as well. This is an extraordinary change. This has not happened before. And we have to be true to this moment and deliver on that change. And it also requires, the second part of it, is the work on renewables. We need more electricity. We need more renewable electricity. And by the way, that's the electricity that's growing around the world, solar and wind power. I know that there's an ideological aversion to that presently in portions of the American government, but that's where the world is going. And we've got to see the signal and not ignore the noise. And the jurisdictions that allow for entry, and that's why these call for powers are important, jurisdictions like Texas have done very well in the space of renewables because they've been open to that. And sometimes that is collaboration, of course, between the oil and gas industry and the renewable industry. But there's an extraordinary opportunity there. And as the Americans are moving away from renewables, this is an opportunity for us in this space where there's enormous opportunity, where the world is going, to drive the needed electricity we need to fuel resource development and other development in BC. I think of AI and other areas.
Minister, that's all we have time for. We're getting kicked out of this room right at 4 o'clock. So we have other things in the program. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us. Appreciate it. Thank you. Present for you, some BC wood and skills have gone into this cutting board. If you have anything, BC cheeses or.
I'm going to use this for regulation.